Out here in the perimeter, there are no stars. Out here, we is stoned, immaculate.
Hello and welcome. This is the C86 show. I'm David Eastaugh. As you know, we love a special guest. This week it's going to be the turn of the American guitarist, keyboard player, songwriter and composer. It is the one and only Morley Bartof, who also goes by the name of CosMorley Be. But I'll give you a few links in the notes below so you'll definitely know who I'm talking about, but has been in a phenomenal amount of different bands and lineups, including Cosmo Topper, the Randy Californians, Burning Sensations, Andy and the Rattlesnakes, and many, many more. But this is going to be the interview, so you'll find out a lot about his life in music. So after several minutes of interesting but casual chat, we get down to that exciting subject that was the early formative years. Morley, it's over to you.
You know, it's going to be kind of a cliche, but it's true that my parents thought I was going to do something with music. So they did two things. They put an AM radio in reach when I would crawl out of bed, I would turn it on and I would hear Beach Boys, early Motown. And I really think that when I heard I Want to Hold Your Hand, I thought, wait, this is a little bit different from Motown. What is this? So I was born in the mid-50s. So my initial reference were the 60s band. I was way into the Stones and the Kinks and the Who, and of course the Beatles. And then the 70s, was when I actually started playing a little bit of music, even in high school. So Bowie, all those things were amazing to me. I really was into early Elton. Early Zappa was a big influence on, I think, it expanded my consciousness in what was possible in rock music, absurd humor, kind of parody. Like I really got into the Firesign Theater, which was not really a band, but in a way they were this absurd theater band. And so I have a theater and music background when I grew up, and I think my biggest thrill was combining certain aspects of all the arts, the correlation of the arts. I think that's why Bowie was so amazing, because he was able to incorporate so many different art forms in all his characters.
Yes, absolutely. So your parents were sort of quite culturally with it then. They were quite excited about their child, because mostly they went through a period of, the war years, they sometimes quite sort of hard times, but your parents sound like they were quite groovy.
I think they were just intuitive because they saw that I had a knack for either singing melodies. So first they brought a drum, and they realized when they heard how loud that was, that may not have been the best idea when I was banging my drum. So they were smart enough to get a piano. And even from an early age, I could hear a melody and I could recreate it on the piano before I had any lessons. It was just a hearing thing. And they were smart enough to do that. I think in their world, they knew some jazz musicians that had probably struggled. They wished that I was...
Oh, you froze him. This is not good.
What's the matter now?
I said you just froze there when you mentioned jazz musicians. It doesn't always have that effect, but I don't know if your internet went slightly weird.
Oh, are we back? Are we okay?
We are back. We are on it, actually. Yeah. So you said they had a certain intuition about music, and they had some jazz musicians in the area.
The struggle, sometimes they weren't making a lot of money, and I think they were worried for me. But my intention was somehow to always play music, to write and to perform in front of a live audience was just the greatest experience. I'll tell you, when I was in 10th grade at high school, they had a school talent show. And I learned the song Summer Rain by Johnny Rivers. Are you familiar with that, Jim?
Oh, yes, Johnny Rivers, yeah.
And in the middle, he sings Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. And so I played that in front of the entire school, an instrumental version. And when it came to the Sgt. Pepper's part, I kind of took a solo like Hendrix, and the entire school stood up and yelled and screamed. And I thought, this is what I want to do.
Well,
And that,
absolutely.
yeah.
So did you say you were born in 55?
Yes.
So there you go. So you must have then been very conscious of the 60s, the way it developed, from those early days of seeing the Beatles to suddenly the 67 period of the Summer of Love. Had you started getting very excited with the revolution and the hippie movement?
It was exciting to me. I had a woman friend who was a few years older than me that went to the Haight. I was living, believe it or not, we moved from Los Angeles to Vegas, and she brought back these early psychedelic magazines and comic books. And she also brought back Love's second album, Da Capo.
Yes.
And even though I was from LA, I went to her house and I listened to those records and I read those magazines. And even though I was too young in some ways to go there at the time, I thought, this is what's happening now. And you could feel the change. I knew there was something exciting going on. It was like, in a way, how people responded to punk rock because it was brand new, revolutionary ideas. It kind of turned them back on what was just pop music from the 60s, early 60s, to something new was happening. And it felt really exciting. And that's my feeling. I think that inspired me too, and inspired me to name my band Cosmo Topper.
Well, absolutely. How did your parents end up going to Las Vegas, by the way?
It's a funny thing because I think my dad found employment. He knew somebody there. They wanted him to actually be in charge of advertising for a classical music radio station, which was amazing to me because he brought me to work a couple times, and that showed me how radio worked when I was really young. And I thought, wow, what a cool thing to even watch how DJs played music. But also, I thought, wouldn't it be cool if you could actually have a record that you were on that DJs played? And I think that really opened my mind to the magic of music and expressing that to a big audience.
Yes, because at that point you'd had the sort of the Rat Pack period, and then obviously Elvis and his residence in the International Hotel, and then you started getting these mega resorts slowly developing. Were you slightly aware, because you would have been 15? Did
Yeah,
Vegas feel like quite a weird place for a growing up period?
you know what? There was a bridge that crossed because I remember my neighbor took me to a show where the Rat Pack and some of the LA Dodgers baseball team were part of the headline show. And I felt, wow, this is an exciting moment because I think I was a fan of baseball. And I'll tell you a really funny story. One day I was playing baseball up front and the ball hit me in a really uncomfortable spot below my belly.
Yes.
And once that happened, I stopped playing sports and started practicing the piano more frequently. So there was a shift from that Rat Pack vibe. And even when Dean Martin introduced the Stones on his show, right, he was making fun of them. But the truth was that old school stuff was going away and new rock music was about to take over what was just pop.
Yes, absolutely. But then, I mean, so you weren't sort of because in LA at that stage, you mentioned the Fire Sign Theatre Company, but there was also things like the Coquettes Theatre Company as well, wasn't there, with Fayette and Pam Tent and various other people, which was quite wacky. Were you aware of that scene as well?
Was only aware of it because I worked in some theatrical productions, and some of the people that were there had actually toured as either a tech or in there. So I was aware of that kind of theatrical, uh, free form, crazy thing that was going on simultaneously, but I was only aware of it from stories. It's not like I necessarily followed them.
Yes. So when we hit the sort of the latter part of that 60s, suddenly, we had 67, the Summer of Love, things going very optimistically. And then a couple of years, we had the Charles Manson moment, and then, Brian Jones dies, and then 1970, Joplin, Morrison, and Hendrix all pass away. What was it like for you, sort of seeing people like that die? And then we had Altamont as well. We had various assassinations. Vietnam, Richard Nixon. What was, you were at that age where you must have been quite raw to all this experience.
It was a dark time period. And I think if you could say that people use this, maybe they over exaggerated that when President Kennedy was assassinated, and then the Beatles appeared, and they kind of, part of it was saying, well, they needed something to heal. And I think that was a really dark time period for our culture. Yet at the same time, right around the corner, you were going to start getting some new music that was going to kind of bring you out of that darkness. And I think that happened post Ultimate. You had, maybe there was a desire to pivot from all that darkness of Manson. And I think that's what culture does. It maybe dips into some dark places, and then hopefully you allow artists to either write about it or to take you away from some of those things that can kind of bring you down, right? But that was a dark time period. I remember my dad reading about the Mansons and saying, no, all these long hairs. It was like everyone was blamed for being like a hippie, even though it was a small percentage of it that was just doing dark things.
Yes, absolutely. So then, when you got 16, do you leave school at that stage, or do you stay on for college?
It's a really good question, because I had gone to see a band. This is where I'm back in Vegas now, and this band was one of the biggest local original bands, and they were called Who's the Father? They were a 9-piece horn band, and I knew all about them. And one day, I was in the theater department of high school. I think I was 16 and a half, and the brother of the guitar player who was going to school with me came running in and said, Morley, they want you and I to join Who's the Father. They know you're playing keyboards, and they want you to come to rehearsal starting Monday night. And that, I felt like I had won lotto, because this band was opening for all the big bands, Delaney and Bonnie, Sweetwater, who was big at the time. They opened up for a Jethro Tull show. And I wrote my first original songs with this 9-piece horn band. And this little label that I'm a part of just re-released my first single, which was called Go Play in the Forest. It sounds like a prog jazz thing, but there's flute solos. But that was the door that opened for me and started my recording and performing for bigger audience. And I was 16 and a half.
Right, so that was 1971 time.
Yes, exactly.
Right, there you go. Had at that stage, had you started, getting into a little bit of smoking, a little bit of tripping? Was that kind of on the horizon, or not as much horizon as just in your life?
I took the pot like a fish out of water. I just did. I never really did anything harder than that, but I think I was married to marijuana. I think that was a really important thing for me. I'm not sure why it resonated with me, but it was part of the time. And everybody around me was it was a secret society that knew where to get it, and you would do hangs with it. It's funny because I'm 6 years free of doing any type of things like that now. I'm not in a 12-step, but it was just something that I wanted to see if I could tap in and be a graduate of contact high instead of being high all the time. But it was really important. I didn't do psychedelics until maybe the mid 70s. And that was a really profound experience. I thought it was helpful, but like anything else, you don't want to take it daily like a vitamin.
No, no, you don't want to see too many bats and bits and pieces, do you, really, in your life? Did you, at that stage, I mean, the music scene had started to change quite a lot. In this country, we had, the birth of, I suppose, heavy rock with people like Black Sabbath and Deep Purple. Then you had glam rock. But then in America, you had this kind of, the singer-songwriter, didn't you? The kind of, the West Coast people like America appeared, the Eagles appeared, James Taylor, Joni Mitchell, all these people started to come along as well, which was definitely a different vibe. Did you embrace that world of the sensitive singer-songwriter?
Here's what I liked. I really liked early Joni Mitchell, because she was using all these open tunings, and there was kind of a really passionate lyrical sense. And even though it wasn't rock, it had the intensity of a rock record. So I was into that. I went through an early Jackson Browne phase. I was far more a Poco fan because I was a big Buffalo Springfield appreciator than I was an Eagles person. Like, I think that, the joke I used to say is that I was really into the Eagles when they were called Poco. And what I mean by that, they took both their bass players, and I really think they were influenced by them. But I there's certain things went through a Cat Stevens phase. I think that was exciting, but I was also into a lot of the British rock. Like, I just think that there was something about between Bowie and Mott the Hoople and even early Queen. There were certain things I've always kind of really been into the British thing. I really like that band Ride a lot. I know we're jumping decades here, but I've always had kind of a thing for British. I think I'm really influenced equally as much as that than I am maybe the American singer-songwriter thing.
Yes. So had you also discovered people like Linda Ronstadt and going to the Troubadour? Was that also part on your horizon?
What? It's funny you say that because I always kind of liked her, but now I'm going back and listening recently to how well she sang. I think there were certain people that were around to interpret other people's songs, right? Like, she was not known for songwriting, but she would take other people's songs from Warren Zevon to Lowell George, and she would make them big hits. And I think that was what her art was. I appreciate her more in retrospect, and at the time, I just thought, "Who is this sexy young lady?"
Yes, no, there you go. Because I had a brother who was 7 years older than me, and he was very into that prog world, but he also had two other albums, and you mentioned one of them, Sergeant Pepper, and also Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, which was a huge album in my life, because I sneak into his little bedroom and find these records and get listened to them when he told me, definitely don't come into my bedroom and listen to my records. But that album really had a massive effect on me. Did you discover early Elton and Goodbye Yellow Brick Road?
Yes, and I think, to tell you, I think I heard an Elton cover on an early Three Dog Night album. And then I read Robert Hilburn's review of the first Troubadour show, and everything about it really resonated to me. Like, the first, Tumbleweed Connection, Madman, even all the way through Honky Chateau, I was all in. And I have a really kind of magical story. I had a friend that managed who's the father. He went on to become a really successful manager. His name was Dennis Turner. He eventually managed Peter, Paul, and Mary and George Benson. I'm going to drop a few more names. And he became really successful. At the time, he was a really close friend, managed my band, and he booked some shows. And he booked Elton in Reno. And he said, "Morley, there's a chair for you on the stage in the back." And this is when Elton was just a trio around 1770. "I want you to come and watch him play." So there I was seeing this amazing concert when he was playing sheds before he played arenas. And at the very end of the show, Elton does a 360 and walks up to me and shakes my hand like I had no idea he knew I was there. And at that point, I thought, wow, these type of magical things can happen.
Yes, my God, that's incredible. Dear old Elton, he sort of checked it out.
He knew.
Yes.
How perceptive he was. And I want to say one thing about Elton. They talk about his great songwriting with Bernie and how great the songs are. But I saw this incredible piano player that combined two or three styles. And I guess people do appreciate it, but I was thinking, this guy is one of the great rock piano players of all time. He just
Yes.
was. Yeah.
Well, and did you kind of also come into contact with people like, I know prog rock, but people like Rick Wakeman? Did they come onto your radar as well?
I was a big fan of early Yes. I mean, really, the first couple records, I liked the way They did a few cover songs. I think I was really big up through Close to the Edge. I think somehow I liked both the prog and the pop worlds. Really liked early Yes. I really, as much as Rick Wakeman kind of expanded things, like starting with Fragile, I'm really a big fan of Tony Kaye's playing on the Yes album. It's simpler, there's not as much technology, and I kind of liked old school Yes. And Bill Bruford, one of my very favorite all time drummers of all time, and Chris Squire's bass tone. I think that rhythm section to this day sounds as unique as any rhythm section anywhere in music.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I also love Alan White. I thought he was
Yeah, he
he
was the
was
perfect, and no slight against him. He did an incredible job. I think what's funny, I'm a real band guy. So if you grow up in real time listening to records with a particular band, you're kind of used to hearing that. But Alan came in a point and kind of helped reinvent their drum sound and made it his own.
yes. I know he also played for a while with Terry Reid as well, which was quite a nice little combination because yes, that was the early 70s.
I love that you mentioned Terry Reid, and here's why. Because I have been able to share the stage with Terry a few times. One of the things I've done for the last 15 years has been part of what's called the Wild Honey Orchestra. If you do a search of them on YouTube, you'll see one night a year at the Alex Theater in Glendale, which holds about 2,500 people. We do an album or an artist, and we either come do the album in its entirety and then do greatest hits. And a lot of times we have the actual artist from that come in, and the Wild Honey Orchestra backs them. And on a couple shows, including when we did the White Album, Terry Reid was a special guest a couple times, and we really bonded because I told him that River was one of my all-time favorite records, and he really appreciated that. And I've seen Terry play a few times. Absolutely phenomenal. Is still gigging, is touring right now as we speak.
Yes, he was in Norwich, I think, a month or two ago, doing his still doing it. Yeah, because that album you mentioned, River, has a great song called Dean, which I think is just beautiful.
Fantastic.
Yes, that what a voice, what a singer, and yes, his 1975 album, which now I can't remember, Sounds of something. Anyway, he's a genius. So look, after Who's the Father, what's your next musical step? Are you still in Las Vegas at this stage?
I'm still in Vegas. I was doing a lot of theater at the same time, and this Dennis Turner management said to me, and this is now, I want to say, the end of 75, he said, Morley, there is a singer songwriter that has a record on Capitol, and she needs a piano player, and she wants you to come to her place in Beechwood Canyon and play on her piano. She wants to hear you. So, December of 75, I go up to the canyon. She has this incredible house, like multiple stories, canyon, typical canyon fantasy. And she's had records out for a while on Folkways, and she's been around. Her name was Maxine Sellers. And we played her songs, and she said, I want you in my band. And that started my journey where we played one night a week in the Valley at a place called the Blah Blah Cafe, which was kind of the Valley's troubadour. Not well known, but a lot of well known artists that came out of there played there too, and they would play the troubadour. And that started and we had a great gig. We opened for Ramblin' Jack Elliott at the troubadour. And I remember Robert Hilburn from the Times was there, Harry Chapin was there, and I played that piano at the Troubadour with Maxine, and I realized all the people that had played that piano before me, you name it, every single major singer-songwriter, and it got a great review, and that kind of started my journey into playing with bands that eventually got signed to record labels and recorded. And that was my entry level. And thank you, Maxine Sellers.
Yes. Did you ever go into the studio with her?
We did not. She had one album out, that I remember Stevie Wonder guested. You know, it was a funny time for her because I don't think she really belonged on a big major label. She was used to being on folk and blues independent labels, and the record didn't sell enough copies. But it opened up the fact that it introduced me to new people, and eventually I got caught up in the new wave signings post the Knack with a band called Bugs Tomorrow on Casablanca, and that was my first time spending days and weeks in a professional recording studio. And that happened maybe 2 or 3 years after I played with Maxine.
Right, Bug. So you'd sort of, because the Knack, had they had My Sharona by then?
Yes, and as a matter of fact, we watched that happen. And when I saw them play the Starwood and the Troubadour way before the single was released, there was something you knew they were going to have a big pop hit with that song. Keep in mind, you're seeing them play in front of 250 people as opposed to selling out arenas worldwide and having a number one record. I feel like in some ways I have all these connections because I did a great session before Doug Feiger passed away at his house, and I played a real organ, a Wurlitzer, a grand piano, and we really connected. And it was just one of those things because he was a great producer. He wasn't just a guy that had one giant hit. And so
No.
that experience. And I actually thanked him because if the Knack wouldn't have been big, then my little new wave band, Bugs Tomorrow, would have never gotten signed to Casablanca.
Yes. So before then, the sort of the music, every 5 years, well, I don't know, every 3 to 5 years, there's always new scenes and new things happening. How did you then navigate that kind of mid-70s, a bit later with the sort of rise of punk rock? Because obviously that comes in and sort of shakes everything up quite a lot at that point, and it sort of buries a lot of that kind of earthy, guitar playing.
Yes, I think that once we heard Sex Pistols, The Clash, when we heard even The Damned, and all of a sudden some of these, I mean, even XTC, which maybe is more new wave, but in the beginning, they were kind of art, experimental. They were kind of noisy right before they became, and all this music, you could tell that things were changing. Elvis Costello, that was kind of the singer songwriter of, Graham Parker. You could just feel the change. And I was just inspired by it. Blondie, Talking Heads, early Talking Heads, and maybe that wasn't hardcore punk rock, right? But it was art and it was different and people were responding. I remember hearing early Devo, it was so raw. It was like the demos they would play, and you could just feel that things were changing. And okay, here's my story. After Bugs Tomorrow broke up, I had a wonderful date, and we went to the Whiskey a Go Go because the motels were playing. They had been around a while, but they were opening for a band that had just signed to Arista, and this band was called The Pop. And even though their music was much darker than pop music, they had three singer-songwriters, and the band I was in with this lady, we had covered their song "Down on the Boulevard," which we loved, kind of a rockin', almost Kinks meet, oh, Raspberries vibe song. We really liked it. So we went to go see them. And I remember thinking, they introduced David Robinson in the audience because he was in the Cars and he had once been in the Pop. And I remember this was probably 1978 or 9. And I remember thinking, this is what you do. You find cool people, you get in a band, you rehearse, you write songs, and then maybe you get a record deal. I didn't know the mechanics, but here's the strange synchronistic thing. Eventually, I would be in a band with, or roommates with, or be produced by, or tour with every single person on that stage in both bands. And I knew none of them at the time I went to that show.
Yes, my God. I think David Robinson, he was also in the Modern Lovers, wasn't he, at one stage?
Exactly. Yep.
And then the Pop, and then, yes, the Cars as well, or something
And then
like that.
Rupert band that was in both the Motels and the Pop, and then he got tossed out because they felt he was both probably too experimental. They wanted pop hits. He formed a band that consisted of my former band, Andy and the Rattlesnakes, and he got assigned to Capitol, and we were called Burning Sensations. We had a video on MTV in 1983. We toured with Peter Tosh and Madness and Roxy Music. And we had about a 2.5, 3 year period where it seemed like everything could happen. And that's kind of my thread of how I went from being in Vegas from Who's the Father to Bugs Tomorrow to Burning Andy and the Rattlesnakes to Burning Sensations. And I really kind of owe once again to Maxine Sellers, may she rest in peace, because she saw something in me that maybe I wouldn't have seen for myself.
Yes, my God, that is a lot of stuff going on. And how did you cope with that kind of transition? I mean, you went from the 60s to the 70s period, then obviously the 70s into the 80s is another kind of chapter, isn't it, as well? Because, at that stage you had went from Jimmy Carter to Ronald Reagan, and suddenly, America starts to sort of change its kind of vibe again, and people are starting to get, I don't know, some people get much more confident and they want a bigger sound and a bigger attitude. Did that sort of musically, was that exciting when you started Burning Sensations?
I think what's interesting, what's great about music, unless you're consciously writing political songs like Rage or The Clash did, I think the great thing about art is that you're writing things for every person. Like, you don't necessarily want to say we're writing songs because we were impacted that Reagan was president. And I think we really wanted to uplift and inspire by our music and not necessarily be overtly political. And I'm hoping that art and culture, although it can certainly reflect what's going on, can exist in a point where you're able to unite people that might be bickering over who you think should be president.
Yes, God, you don't want to start that little avenue. Well, in this country, we had, 79 Thatcher came in, then we had the Falkland War, then we had this miners' crisis. There was a lot of kind of unrest at that point. Then there was the sort of threat of nuclear war. So there was the Greenham Common people were sort of also protests. And so there was a lot of protests in the UK at that stage. And, musically, things went, there was the mainstream where you had that kind of big production sound, Trevor Horn, you had, ABC, Frankie, then Spandau Ballet, Duran Duran, Sade. On the other side, people were getting quite political. And I guess in America, it was slightly different, wasn't it? You didn't have quite that kind of little microcosm of music like we probably did at that point.
I liked listening to all those British bands and I was inspired. I mean, I did really get into the early beat, which we know them as the English beat, and specials. And there was an element of that which really addressed kind of racial inequality and maybe fascist thinking. And I was inspired by all that. And I think that Andy and the Rattlesnakes, which, by the way, we finally put out our first record after being in, and there's going to be a documentary next year. I'm going to keep you posted about it.
Oh,
About
God,
the
yes.
band. That band was never necessarily successful, but a lot of people in that band went on to play with far more successful bands. And there's an interesting history about it. And that band was more political. We had a song called Third World Wives. I think we were influenced by a lot of the British bands that were addressing the issues you mentioned.
Yes. So with your Burning Sensations, the LA, they say it says here you were there from sort of 82 to 87, which is quite a big time, isn't it, really? I mean, you brought out the first EP, Belly of the Whale in 1982, and then the album comes out in 83. How did it sort of come together? Because this is a 6-piece band with Tim on vocals, McGovern.
Yes. I think that what was great was Tim had just gotten tossed out of the Motels, and Roger Prescott of the Pop brought him to the very last show of Andy and the Rattlesnakes, which was at a very kind of well-known reggae third world rock club in Silver Lake called the ON Club. And he saw our last show and he thought, I can't believe Andy was going to leave LA and go to New York and become a music teacher, a doctor of music at a school. And he just took our band and he played us 2 demos. And one was Belly of the Whale, and another one had a little more of an R&B feel called Flipside that the Motels had rejected. And we thought, these are great songs. And it was this magical time where we literally started playing Madame Wong's Chinatown.
Oh my God, that's such a famous place.
Yes, every Monday night at 11 p.m. for 35 Mondays in a row. And during that time, every single label in Los Angeles came to see us, just either decide we were too noisy, we were too weird. And then Capitol said, Richard, who was president, I'm trying to think of his last name, he was from England. He thought we were fantastic. And he signed us. And it was one of those bad news, good news. He brought us in right after he signed us. He goes, I've got bad news and good news. He goes, the bad news, they're moving me to EMI in England, so I'm not going to be around to work your record. But the good news is we left a budget for you to do a video. And that video and song, Belly of the Whale, was on MTV 3 times a day for about 5 or 6 months. And all the alternative radio stations, K-Rock and all of the K-Rock stations started playing Belly of the Whale. And I have a funny story about Martha Quinn. 2 years later, we were like not going to really be a band for much longer. And I'm watching MTV and Martha Quinn says, Burning Sensations, where are you? We need a follow-up single. We love your song. And I felt like it was like Auntie M from Wizard of Oz. I'm saying, we're right here. I'm waving my hand. She's not seeing us, but it was one of those magical moments. But we had some great shows. We opened 3 shows for Roxy Music. We played, we did a great show with Madness. Madness, we played a little mini tour. I mean, I had a great time with Burning Sensations. We were very lucky, even though it didn't necessarily happen much longer than it did, but it was part of that magical time when you could have a video on MTV and you could gig all over the country.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, obviously, LA at that stage had sort of, because there's a woman I interviewed probably last year who was also in a band who had a bit of a reggae vibe about them as well, which unfortunately I won't be able to remember in the next 5 seconds. But again, I think they only brought out a few releases, possibly a retrospective compilation, but God, I wish I could remember it. But that was also, reggae was quite a vibe then in LA at certain times in the 80s.
It was, and we were more, dare I say, Afro-Caribbean surf Hendrix vibe. So even though we did a tour with Peter Tosh, the reggae purists looked at us like we were from Mars because we really didn't have one reggae pocket, although we were definitely what I would call early on the term world beat, which wasn't even yet. But we kind of incorporated it, but really at the heart of it, we were a rock band that was influenced by a lot of these other polyrhythmic rhythms. And still, we wanted to have choruses at songs that hopefully you could sing to. And that's why Belly of the Whale is still kind of being played on radio stations today.
Yes, and I'm impressed that, because there was another cult movie, we loved a lot of cult movies in the 80s, Repo Man, which was directed by Alex Cox. You had a track on that, Pablo Picasso.
That's a great story, too, because we covered Pablo Picasso in our set, which is the Jonathan Richman song. And one night, the producer of Repo Man, Peter, came in and said, I want your guys' version of that in the movie. So one afternoon, I get a call and it says, I want you to come to Cherokee Recorders. We have 3 hours to record this song. And Cherokee is, of course, where great Bowie records were done. It's a very well-known studio on Fairfax if you want to do a search. So here I was at Cherokee. We did 1 or 2 takes. I played this Hammond organ, which you could barely hear unless you put headphones on. I'm kind of doubling what the sax is doing. And at the end of the session, the producer comes up. He gives us a small amount of cash and makes us sign a piece of paper. And here's what's a funny story. I'm thinking we got to come back in and mix this song. So a week later, I'm at Cantor's Deli and I see the executive producer and I go up to him and I say, when are we going in to mix that song so that it'll sound good? He goes, mix it. It's coming out on Friday. So when we left, that was the mix that you're hearing in the movie Repo Man. We went to the premiere at Universal, and Harry Dean was there. I remember the entire NAC were there. It was a big deal. Here's the thing about that movie. It completely bombed when it came out. Then
Yes.
later, it started playing on cable. They had to re-release the movie and the soundtrack, and now it's a very successful movie because it was discovered later on cable and became a really big. And Iggy is on the main song. Clem Burke plays drums. It's really kind of an interesting soundtrack if you can find it.
Yes, well, I remember there was another one called, oh God, with Jeff Daniels in, not After Hours, or Trading Places. What was that Jeff Daniels film? So anyway, as the 80s were progressing, you were in LA, hair metal becomes quite the thing, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's
Uh,
funny. It does. And at that point, I mean, I want to say, are we talking late 80s now, maybe?
Well, I
Early?
suppose we've gone from the mid sort of 80s to towards that next part where really the sound of music had changed so radically at that point, in the sense of just being like massively bombastic, a lot of confidence. We had the Rocky films had sort of happened. People were getting very American, the stock market, people were very bullish, lots of money. Oh, it was Something Wild. That was the one.
Wow,
Something
that,
Wild with Jeff Daniels had a really good soundtrack. Sorry. Um,
yeah,
yeah, so I just wondered how you were starting to sort of look at, when you heard Bon Jovi's, like
that's funny.
massive songs and people with massive hair. How was that for you as a musician?
Yeah, that wasn't my thing. I just thought, I'm not quite sure what I thought about it. Like, we're talking pre-grunge now, right? Like, because once that the
Yes, it
grunge
was very
stuff,
pre-grunge.
right? Yeah, I was in a couple bands playing different experimental music. I was in a band called Talkback, and that band has one song on the Pretty in Pink soundtrack. I want to say this is later 80s. Like, I kind of think this is when the hair metal thing was going on. And if you see, there's a video called Rudy. They're in a scene in a nightclub. Talkback. I had left the band by then, but Burning Sensations had tried to get back together again, but that wasn't my scene. The hair metal, or I know Van Halen was really really big, and I get it. And then that kind of sound, and then you have that pop metal sound, but that wasn't my thing either. I'll just, good for people. If it makes you happy, then it can't be that bad. But, at that point, I think I was waiting for shoegaze at that point for things to come around in the early 90s. I know I'm jumping timelines, but that scene really inspired me. A lot of the band, like Stone Roses and even Chapter House, Ride, Lush, those bands really somehow inspired me a lot.
Yes, my God, they're quite obscure bands, actually. I mean, even in the UK, they're quite obscure. So how were you tuned? Was Rodney playing these records?
Yes, yes. And, I have to say that K Rock itself has always been supportive of my bands. And, I wound up playing and recording on and off with the band Dramarama, which Rodney discovered, right? And by
Yeah.
thinking they were a band. And I'm really good friends with that entire band. I'm on their most recent record. And even this Sunday, I'm going to be on KLOS FM underscoring a Breakfast with the Beatles show, which was Chris Carter, the founding bass player of Dramarama, and the guitarist of Dramarama is in part of my band that we're going to be underscoring. And I have this thread. Like, I certainly think that sometimes you're inspired by bands and you're so inspired by them that eventually you wind up being in them. But my crazy story about Dramarama. And here's the craziest story. I'm going to tell you this. I went to go see the quote unquote farewell show at the Roxy, Dramarama breaking up. At that point, Clem Burke from Blondie is their drummer. They recreated their original stage, which had like Velvet Underground movies or Andy Warhol movies showing on television screens. They had decorated the entire Roxy stage with like a 70s living room, like big fluffy pillows, and they were playing all around the living room. And the set was just mind blowing because, granted, they had one super hit, but their albums were really good. They were kind of glam, supercharged. Mott meets Bowie meets Melody. I just was really into that band. And I remember thinking right there at the Roxy, thinking, this band is way too good to be breaking up. Like it made no sense to me. And the weird thing is, a few years later, I'd be on that exact same stage playing with the original band, their very first album, Cinema Verite. And that began kind of my 20-year journey of being what they call a secret weapon, where I get to play keyboards. I've done tours with them. I'm on their last album. Knock on wood, they're going to invite me for their next album. And it's just one of those strange things. If you believe your vibe is where you leave it, that was an example. I said, I can't believe where I kind of said that out loud. And then here I am on that stage. And that show was taped for VH1 Bands Reunited. You remember that show?
Yes, absolutely. That's amazing.
Something funny. If you look at that show on YouTube, Bands Reunited Dramarama, and you don't blink, you can see me with my top hat in about 5 or 6 scenes. If you blink, you will not see me, but there's a couple shots of me. And I was just thrilled. And that kind of began my journey I'm still close friends with everybody, even though I don't play with them full time anymore.
No, my God, that's an amazing story. My God, you do pack it in on that front. So then, yes, you mentioned after the hair metal, then obviously Kurt Cobain comes along and grunge starts to appear. And again, those kind of musicians get sort of pushed, to one side. Quite right too. So how did you then navigate that sort of period, the Seattle grunge scene that started to appear?
I really got into playing guitar because keyboard is my main instrument. And I looked at it as a challenge. And I put together this 4-piece band called Daisy Chain. And here's how I navigated it. We weren't grunge. We were probably more shoegazer meets mamas and papas. We had 2 women and 2 men, a lot of 4-part harmonies. And I was experimenting with a lot of like flange and delay effects on the guitar. And that was a great challenge for me. We came close to signing a couple deals. We have a song and a movie soundtrack. It never panned out. And it eventually led me to starting my own band project, which is called Cosmo Topper. And hopefully I'll be able to send you some links and people can check out my material on Bandcamp. And that was kind of the bridge in between the hair metal, the grunge, the shoegaze, which eventually led me to play probably more full time with Dramarama.
Yes, my God, we loved that sort of 90s period is kind of fascinating because I don't know if you've sort of seen it, though jumping a bit ahead, but it starts quite well with sort of people like Nirvana and sort of there's a little bit of a resetting going on, and then we had the Riot Girls sort of movement, which was also exciting. But then we end with Woodstock '99, where it's like that kind of metal rap music of very angry young men. Had you, as a musician, seeing this going on, what was that like?
I always thought that music was supposed to inspire creative or great ideas, like not to destroy or set things on fire, because then it's just kind of ultra violence for violence sake. And I think it's a misuse of power. So all of a sudden you have a platinum record and you have a song called Break Things and you encourage people to do crazy things. I think that's a real misuse of your gift. and I couldn't even believe it because it soiled the original concept, even though Woodstock was kind of a muddy mess in its own way. But really, it propelled all, it kind of was this universal agreement that you could kind of have this massive amount, kind of maybe put a positive vibe out there. And it's interesting because almost every person that played Woodstock went on to really long, successful careers.
Yes. And such a legacy, which wasn't quite the case with Woodstock 99, but still, it makes an interesting film of what happens when you get it quite wrong.
Yes, you know what? In a way, right? Think about it. It was kind of a reflecting weird, more modern version of what happened at Altamont, right? Because Altamont was supposed to be, oh, we're going to put on this free show, we're going to have all these great bands, and it was such a dark, weird vibe from the get go, like from way before anything happened. And you kind of could sense that with Woodstock 1999. It really, I think sometimes trying to force a scene to happen and try to say, here's where you think it should be. And then the vibe gets out of control. So, yeah, that was a dark time. I watched that movie, right? The documentary on 99, and it's like, yikes.
Yes, it's exhausting. It's a bit like Apocalypse Now, isn't it? It keeps getting worse.
Right. And, listen, I understand using art as an incentive to inspire for great ideas and to create change. But if you're just having some type of war, then really you're the antithesis of what I think art should do. It should inspire. I mean, it doesn't mean that you can't channel your anger into certain aspects or be political, but certainly to destroy things is the antithesis of creativity, in my opinion.
Yes, well, it's not good. So when you get Cosmo Topper, is this a project that is going to be, has run for years, hasn't it?
Yes. My good friend Eddie Hirsch, may he rest in peace, before Electric Light Orchestra, we had this fantasy band, and we wanted four string players, and we wanted to have Beatle influenced music. And then ELO happened. Eddie passed away, but I chose that name for two reasons. One, it was because it was his idea, and two, because in the Topper movie, the spirits come back after the automobile accident, and they teach him that it doesn't matter how old you are, that you can create positive things and have a great time, even though his wife is trying to suppress that. And I used that theme to write songs that were somewhat metaphysical. There was a great magical bookstore on Melrose called the Bodhi Tree, and I wrote this song, Topper Takes a Trip, and it's about exploring metaphysical, uplifting ideas and synchronistic things. And that's been on and off. We had a song that wound up in the closing credits of the Mayor of the Sunset Strip documentary on Rodney. And that song is called For the Time Being. And that got extensive radio play on both K Rock and Little Steven's Underground Garage. And as a matter of fact, I heard that Rodney played my song Hippie Christmas last night on his kind of Little Steven's Underground Garage show. So Cosmo is still ongoing. We just played a gig a few weeks ago. It has a rotating amount of band members, and I'm going to go in the studio in the beginning of the year, and I'm going to cut a new single that I'm working on now.
God, that's amazing. That is fantastic. So then, yes, as we navigated the millennium period, what happens during the 2000 decade?
Um, if I kind of get this right, that in the 2000s, I went from just sitting in on occasion with Dramarama, that the two things that happened was I was in a band. Okay, here's a little filling in the hole. I was in a band, and the name may be intimidating and weird to some people, and that band was called The Negro Problem. And the Negro Problem had a brilliant genius songwriter by the name of Stu. And Stu wrote these songs. Some of them wound up being in a very successful Broadway play called Passing Strange. And you can do a search on it. And I was in, he wrote these songs. Some of them were done when we were playing as that they would have to change the name sometime to TNP because people would get upset with the name. But he was a great, powerful Afro-American voice who wrote great lyrics and really great melodies. And the
Yes.
reason why I'm telling you this is we were supposed to play a gig at the Derby. And during an hour or two before the gig, Stu hurt his knee. And so there was going to be a partial Drama-Rama reunion. And at that time, Chris Carter, who is a successful DJ on both Sirius XM and KLOS, called me up and said, Morley, do you want to come and play on one song? Since Stu can't do it, you were going to go there anyway, come. So I went there. It was being filmed for a PBS television show. I wound up playing two songs. This is early 2000s. And it went so well that I wound up doing that Roxy show for the Bands Reunited. That was about 2004, maybe.
Mm.
And here was the big gig, which started it really to where the 2000s came in. They had this, where the site of the US Festival, they had this annual festival that K-Rock sponsored, and this one was called Flashback to the Future. And The Cure and Duran Duran and a whole bunch of other bands were the headliners, including Jet. Do you remember Jet?
God, they ring a bell.
Yeah. Are You Gonna Go My Way? I think, no, that's not it. Something like that. And also, anyway, there were like 20 bands, and we played on the second stage. And when we played Dramarama, the crowd went nuts because Dramarama hadn't done a big show, and there was an agent in that audience. And after that, I was lucky because I happened to be playing with them. Dramarama had some great little mini tours throughout the United States. I got to go with them. We played Central Park. We played the site of Lollapalooza in Chicago. We played the Coliseum, and I was just like a kid in the candy store. I was just luckily, I had said yes to this one gig, and that kind of took me through a good chunk of the 2000s. And then that next thing, I'll just kind of give you the foreshadow. I wound up in this theatrical production of a John Lennon show called Just Imagine. And I got back to playing John Lennon songs in a theater. And that show toured. We played some great shows in Reykjavik and Santiago, Chile. We played Canada. We played Cancun. We did tours. And that brought me back from my theater roots, which started in high school and a couple years in college. And that led me from Dramarama to being in that show, which lasted for 10 years. And you're almost up to date.
Yes, well, so with that one, which was the Stu and Heidi and the Negro problem, that's kind of the work of James Baldwin, right?
Yes, they've done that. That was their next thing, I believe, right after Passing Strange. And I recorded 3 records with him. He was an amazing band. I'll tell you one great story about Stu and Heidi. When I was playing with them, somehow Clem talked Chris and Debbie into having us open for them at the Fillmore in San Francisco. So we go, this is like maybe my other first really big gig before Dramarama, for a sold out audience. And people that know this, that if you sell out the Fillmore, of course it was because of Blondie, there's a poster generated, which was like a bucket list for me to be in a band from a poster from the Fillmore, from that history. So we play this show, and I'm telling you, the audience, Blondie's audience, although we definitely had some friends and fans, flipped out for Stu and Heidi, and they screamed for an encore. And at the end of the night, I'm on cloud 9, and I'm walking up the stairs to go to the dressing room. And there, with their hand stretched out to grab my hand, is Debbie Harry.
Amazing.
So she grabs my hand. She starts raving about the set, about Stu as a songwriter. She said, at first the name was offensive, but now I get it. I heard all the lyrics. She won't let go of my hand, and she's raving about my piano playing. And all I'm doing is thinking, you are a poster on my wall at home.
Yes,
And it
quite.
was like this thing. I mean, it was like, I felt like I won rock and roll lotto. And that was my experience. And the next night we played the Will Turn, and Debbie came up to me and thanked me again. And I'm thinking, this is why you're in rock music, because things like this can happen.
Yes, absolutely. So yes, I sort of had to collect, I think about 20 packets of crisps. This is in the 1970s to send them off to get a poster of Debbie Harry for my wall. So
Oh,
when she was on Top of the Pops or what they were doing, Denis, I thought, God, this is the greatest record I've ever heard. So you had to get
incredible.
it. It was there. So yeah, so my one of those other obsessions I had when I was growing up was Spirit. For some reason, I felt like I discovered them, even though they were one of those bands who'd slightly been and gone by the time I was old enough. But they were sort of my personal band. No one knew anything about Spirit. So how did you? Because you've got this project, haven't you? The Randy Californians.
So great you're mentioning that, because I wanted to honor Randy was like a mentor to me in a lot of ways, because when Daisy Chain opened for Spirit, actually Ed and Randy and a bass player, Randy wanted me to play guitar when they played I Got a Line on You. And I looked at him and I said, I'm not going to play lead guitar while you're on this stage. Then he had forgotten I was a keyboard player, but I always kind of regretted the opportunity. So I thought, I'm going to release a single. And it was all about my dog, George. And I wanted a song that my mother would appreciate before she passed. And so I chose the name the Randy Californians in his honor. And we tried to somewhat emulate Spirit's sound. I loved those first 4 records on Epic. I listened to them forever. And so when he walked into the Fog Cutter in Vegas, I thought, I created this because I had spent hours listening to everything from Clear to Dr. Sardonicus to the family that plays together. There was just something about that band that's so completely unique.
Yes. They were, yes, the family that plays together. Yeah, I remember having that Clear. I wasn't so familiar. 12 Dreams I was, but I really loved that, bizarrely, the Spirit of 76 and the Son of Spirit and Farther Along.
The spirit of 76, they cover some really cool, great cover arrangements of like even Dylan on that record, if I try to remember that right. I like
Yes.
that.
So they
Yeah,
do, the times are a changing.
I really that. Really like the arrangement, really inventive. He had a gift for melody. Um, there's a live version of YouTube of Randy and another person on TV doing Nature's Way, and it's such a great live vocal performance. He had a knack of both singing and writing. Like if you think about how ahead of the time lyrics were, but I'm a big appreciator of Spirit.
Yeah, they do a great song called "Victim of Society," which I always remember being very impressed. They
I
also
like
on that particular album they do like a Rolling Stone as well. So
I like all those songs, both those songs you just mentioned. Yeah,
yeah,
that
it was quite something. But obviously, yeah. So this project, it's so you're not particularly doing his numbers. You're doing music that sound with the sort of letting the
inspired
spirit.
my mind, like to kind of duplicate that. Like for instance, at the end of Dog Georgie, there's a couple of horns which I kind of emulated from The Morning Will Come, which is on Sardonicus. Sardonicus has some hidden deep album tracks. It's really an interesting record, and maybe got better through time. But there's some horn things, and there's a guitar solo which I would never emulate Randy, but I was inspired by him. Let's just say that.
Yes, absolutely. No, God, it's nice that you got to meet him. I saw them twice. I saw him doing, I think it was almost a solo show, but I also saw them supporting Wishbone Ash as well once. This is probably in the late 80s or early 90s, actually. So, yeah.
Great I've got a great reunion spirit story to tell you, and it was one of those things they even wrote about it in Rolling Stone's music notes. You remember those? It would have its own page, right? And
Yes.
1975, I'm almost sure, Santa Monica, it was a complete reunion for the first time of all the original members, everyone. And it was a great show. Firefall opened, and of course, Firefall contained the bass player of Spirit, whose name is slipping me right now, but I'll remember it. But he was in that band, and Firefall had some kind of pop AM radio hits at the time. And Firefall brought on special guest Neil Young, 1975 Santa Monica Civic, and the audience would not stop screaming because it was peak Neil Young, mid
Yes.
70s. So Spirit plays, their set is well received. I was really happy to be there. And for their encore, they're going to do like a Rolling Stone. And they say, we're going to invite Neil Young back on stage to play with us. So Neil comes in. Once again, the audience is yelling louder than anything that's happened so far because it's peak Neil, right? So they start playing like a Rolling Stone, and Randy changes the lyrics to the song, and he sings, you used to play with Crosby, Stills, and Nash, and now you're simply doing it for the cash. And there is a fight on stage. Jay Ferguson slams his tambourine down. They yell at each other. The band storms off stage, and the entire audience is left like dumbfounded, like what's happening? It's the weirdest ending. 2 minutes later, the band comes back with Neil. They all have their arms around each other, and they go and finish the song.
Because was there a story that Neil once pushed Randy off stage, though?
There's a couple of crazy stories that might have happened. I think there was a time it seemed like maybe LSD might have played too big of a role in certain people's lives. I don't really know the story, but somebody once told me that one of the members of Spirit, maybe he'll remain nameless, went to go see 2001 Space Odyssey. And when it came to that psychedelic part, that they went running in and tried to dive into the screen. We'll just
Excellent.
leave that to your imagination.
Nice. Well, yeah, absolutely. So you've done an amazing amount of work. Have you managed to archive or keep some sort of record
You
of
know,
all your bits and pieces?
amount of things that are stored. I would send people, the best place to go is Discogs. Discogs has a really good, I think there's maybe 70, 75 different releases. Some of them are duplicates because they're in different countries, right? But Discogs has a great breakdown and readout of most of all the recordings that I've done. And
Yes.
I do, there are a couple sites where it has, I've had like little bits of great successes with a lot of different, and I think that's kind of like, I just enjoy that band experience. I think I'm kind of like a band, serial band monogamist. Like I'm really into bands. I'll be with them. I'm very dedicated. Sometimes they get back together again, and we're all kind of continuous families that find different projects to do. I feel very lucky about it. I would really like some great gig where I could cash in with lots of money, but sometimes that's not everybody's path when you're playing music. Sometimes it's just when's the next gig and how can you have a great time and people can all enjoy themselves.
Well, absolutely. And yes, I've sort of noticed that there's quite a lot of musicians I've interviewed who in America are often living in desert around the Joshua Tree. I get the feeling that if they did make some money, that money's gone. And now they're sort of very much back to a very basic lifestyle, but playing the odd gig here and there in some bar in some town around the Joshua Tree or outside LA.
Yes. I've been really, I don't know why I'm mentioning this, but I think there's some really interesting bands that manage longevity, like the Dream Syndicate. They're really interesting to me because they've never had a pop hit or a single, but they've managed to have a really healthy, inventive, creative career. Steve Wynn, a great songwriter with really interesting explorations. And there's certain paths that you can find where you're going to continue your path and you're going to find successful enough to continue. And that's a gift.
Yes, absolutely. And he also just brought his book out this year, didn't he, Steve?
Yes, he did. And which brings me back to the Wild Honey Orchestra, which is really my spiritual musical family because Steve does solo shows and the Dream Syndicate movie, I think before it was released, was screened in what I call the Wild Honey Foundation backyard. So besides the big shows, they do smaller shows in outside in this really nice, maybe 100 seat little amphitheater. Cosmo Topper just played there. And, I have these extended families, and we've been doing Wild Honey Foundation shows since I think the mid 90s. And Steve Wynn is a big appreciator and supporter of Wild Honey. I think his book was on sale. They showed the movie. Steve has done solo shows. I think Dream Syndicate played there too, but I think that's a great example of somehow finding longevity in the music business without really selling out to a point where their integrity is intact. And that's inspiring to me. And you know who else is inspiring? Kilby. Steve Kilby, he really said nice things about the Cosmo Topper record, Pure Fast Vibrations. And that was really inspiring to me because I've seen the church 20 times.
Oh, that's amazing, because I did an interview with him this year, and he's just brought out a solo album and his new album, and God, he's incredible.
Incredible. And I think he's an example, right, of getting into your, may we say, slowly senior age, but still being really on top of your game, really being creative and inventive. And your new records don't sound like this is an old guy. It sounds like this guy is still firing on all his.
Yes, I think you're absolutely. So, with all the projects that you're working on or have been working on, which ones are still the ones that are still ticking over, so to speak?
I think that I like to jokingly say that I have affairs. All my other bands are like affairs, but my wife that I'm married to is Cosmo Topper. And I'm going to put together a collection with a few new songs. Maybe I don't want to call them greatest hits, but a collection of things that I've recorded maybe in the last 15, 20 years and maybe put that together. But that's kind of my pride and joy, so to speak, that kind of it's my arrangements and songs and lyrics. And I really enjoy working with other people and doing other projects, but I can get lost in that, right? Because I'm such a band guy. Like, oh, you have a gig for me? What, we're going to go travel? Let's go record, because I love doing that. But I want to try to focus on next year on putting out maybe another Cosmo record.
Right, that's fantastic. And is Wild Honey Orchestra, is that still happening?
It is. It is. It's usually they do one really big show. I mean, there's a magical story about it because a lot of times all the money goes to great causes. And for the last few years, Wild Honey has been supporting progressive healing for autism. And the amazing thing about Paul Rock and his search, his son is part of a nonverbal autistic on that type of the chain. And during COVID lockdown, he wasn't able to, he was nonverbal. It was found that he could communicate by iPad. And they found all around him that he was really intelligent. Like, people think if you can't speak or if you're making strange sounds that you must not be very smart. But the opposite was true. And Jacob Rock is a teenager now. And he said to his dad, I don't want to be called Jake. And then, of course, they have voice version of when you type. And he said, my name is Jacob, and I have a symphony that I want to write. So he got together with the music director of Wild Honey, explained him how he wanted the strings and the horns and the percussion to sound by giving Rob Loffer cues. And they wrote this symphony that was performed, and it was phenomenal. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because, ironically, we've been doing all these great shows once a year, Wild Honey Orchestra, for great causes. But now Paul's son, who's the leader of Wild Honey, just got back from New York, where this very prestigious ballet company is doing movements of Jacob's Symphony, and eventually they may take that to a much bigger stage. So they just did a thing on a morning show, 60 minutes, the morning show of CBS on Jacob Rock, and that's Wild Honey Foundation's current history. I'm sure there'll be a big show next year. We want to do Warren Zevon. We reunited Love and Spoonful. We had Richie Furay for the Buffalo Springfield show. We had Garth Hudson for the band show. And every year we do something really unique, and we have special guests who have had maybe much bigger successes, and then they're backed by the Wild Honey Orchestra. And I get to, this last year, a year ago, I got to play second rhythm guitar with Johnny Echoes of Love on a version of Seven and Seven Is. It was like one of my greatest fantasies in front of a sold out audience. And then the second song I got to play next to Peter Buck from REM and the founding keyboard player of the Seeds, and we did Pushing Too Hard.
Amazing. God, I have to say, you mentioned Warren Zevon, but I love, there's a song he does called Porcelain Monkey, which is still one of my favorite tracks he's ever written.
How great is he? And we were trying to do it last year, but sometimes people's schedules, right, to get everybody to line up that you need to make it happen. So I'm hoping next year, knock on wood, that we'll be able to honor Warren, because I think his time, if people could sit and see an evening, and of course, all of these shows are available eventually on DVD or video on YouTube. If you do a search on Wild Honey Orchestra, you can get a big idea of what I'm talking about.
Yes, absolutely. And look, something that I noticed on one of your pages, which, as you know, I can tell you're always looking for the next thing, and you've got, yes, you're just good at being able to, yes, keep young in mind, spirit, and body. But one artist that I sometimes struggle to see that magic in is Billie Eilish. You love Billie Eilish, don't you?
I do, and I'm trying to figure out how to explain why that is.
Yes, because I want to, and
Yes.
I've got my Taylor Swift. I've listened to a lot of her stuff. Her lockdown albums were amazing. I thought that live show was extraordinary. I think she's just to keep herself together with that amount of energy around her. Most people would just explode, wouldn't they, and be in rehab or dead. But she's pretty amazing. But Billie Eilish, I've tried. So hopefully you can explain something that I'm missing here.
First of all, I really think there's something magical about a brother and sister working creative process. I think that even we have histories where brothers, even though that can be very cantankerous, I mean, everything from the Kinks to Oasis to the Everly Brothers, that can be problematic. I followed Billy and her brother since they were really doing small shows. They came from Highland Park, which is really close to where my wonderful lady Susan lives, and Highland Park became this scene, and I kind of watched it happen, and I just thought there was something there. Um, it's hard to explain, but I could send you the two songs that really speak to me, and one is called "The Power," and there's a second two or three songs from the previous album that I'm really inspired. The new one I'm still cracking. I know I haven't quite gotten into it quite as much, but I don't know why. What you're asking a really important question, which is this: why is it that some things resonate with some people on such a big, profound level that somebody else who may share a lot of the same appreciation for so much music doesn't hear it? And it's really hard to explain. It may be that there's a local vibe that I'm getting from her because I spend so much time in the city where she was born and raised, that maybe I'm hearing her environment that I'm connecting to because I'm going to her original city to spend 4 days for the holiday. So I don't know if that's the answer, but it may be that I hear it as this local thing. Like, why do I connect to it? I know she's not for everybody, even though she just sold out 5 shows in a row at the IKEA. But I was into her when she was playing much smaller shows.
Yes,
And
well,
you see,
I'm gonna. The Power you mentioned. What was the other songs you'd said? I must check these out.
I want to send you that song because I actually covered that song once because it moved me so much. It was about the abuse of power she was writing to either a rock star friend that was used to date her, and she was scolding him by you're misusing your power of success to seduce younger women. And I could feel how she was reading him the riot act and don't abuse it because if you've been given this gift and what are you doing with it? And I thought, wow, that's so profound for somebody who just turned 20.
Yes. Well, I will. I will watch the rest of that Tiny Desk concert that
Yeah.
she's just released.
Yes.
It's good. It's good.
I
No,
think
I'm always
that
open to these things. I'm always just curious on certain bits that I think I don't get it, but some people do.
yeah, I find that way sometimes too. Like I know all my friends are crazy about the lemon twigs right now. They will rave about them forever. I can see how good they are and how inventive and creative, but I feel maybe I'm this is gonna sound weird. They're I they're for another generation and not for me. But I have friends around me and they can't figure out why I'm not going to every one of their shows.
Oh yes. So was that the lemon
Yeah, the
twigs?
Twigs, they kind of, you know what? They're really inventive. They're two brothers, great harmonies. They have interesting chord changes. You know, if I had to tell you what they remind me of John Bryan, Jellyfish, and the Grays, and Todd Rundgren. But all of those things I just mentioned to you kind of spoke to me emotionally on another level. I know how talented and really great they are, but I don't quite get it. And it's weird because in some ways it reminds me of what you were saying about Billy. Like you can tell that she's got something there, but it may not resonate to you.
Yeah. No, I will. I will watch the rest of that concert and see what happens.
That song, and I want to see if you feel any differently about it.
I'm going to focus on it 100%. There you go. I mean, if you were able to whisper to your 16-year-old self some worldly advice or some little top tips that you've got since yes, as you've been on this planet for quite a lot of decades, is there anything in particular that you would have just said, look, just check this out or do this or focus on that or don't focus on this? Is there anything in particular that you would have told your 16-year-old self?
I think I would say you're in it for the long haul. Enjoy each morsel of the ride. And because you're in it, you're obviously not going to look for a plan B. So enjoy the entire process. I think it's really sometimes about enjoying the process. Like, what did I hear Quincy Jones once gave an associate of mine some advice? And that was spend your time getting better as opposed to getting over.
Mm.
I think is really a fascinating way to look at things. Like, you know, a lot of people are really focused, like, what can I do to become more successful? And I'm thinking sometimes it's like, what can I do to get better and to continue having the same level of great experiences, right? Because I think that's what it's about. I feel like I've been blessed of having a lot of diverse experiences. And I think what's shocking to me is that I still feel that there's more coming, even at my age.
Yes, well, absolutely. If you're walking and talking and breathing in the morning, you still got it.
Without a doubt. Still have it. Going to this big FM radio station on Sunday, and I'm going to play music live on the air, and that's exciting to me. I have a rehearsal tonight in a few hours, and you know the story continues.
It does continue. Well, look. Oh, yeah. Just to clarify, how do you like to be known by? By the, what's your?
My name is Morley Bartnof. That's
Yes.
my name. And Cosmo Topper is my main project. And people a lot of times call me Cosmo, and that's fine too. I like jokingly to say, whatever you do, just don't call me late for dinner. I'll be there.
Yes, I can pick either.
Yes, I respond to both. And, it's funny, my mother, may she rest in peace, when she would listen to me when I would be on the radio and they would address me by Cosmo, she would say, and they're calling you by your other name. I used to laugh so hard. Like she would like to hear the name, my birth name. So when I did the Randy Californian song about Dog Georgie, I used my name in front of it because I wanted her to see that I could also do that.
Nice. She'll like that. Well, she liked it. But look, this has
Yeah,
been amazing. Look, I'll keep in touch and I'll send you the link as well and keep an eye out. And that'll be fantastic.
I had a great time. I really appreciate your show. I experienced a bunch of the other ones, and I feel honored that you do this
No,
today.
it's been amazing. Well, look, take care. Thanks again.
Thank
And
you. I
have a
appreciate
lovely day. I'm not going to bed. See you
Bye-bye.
later. Bye-bye. And that, dear listener, is the end of the interview, though you probably guessed that. Or gathered that. That was me in conversation with Morley talking about his life in music. This has been the C86 show, David Eastaugh. If you want to contact me, you can on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, just do C86 show. All these interviews have been archived. Aren't you lucky? You can find those on Spotify, iTunes, Podbean. Check it out. Anyway, have a great week. Stay safe.